Morning everyone, and happy Tuesday. I hope the day started well for you. I'm a little pink in the face because I've just come out of a hot shower, having been on a long morning bike ride, and it was lovely to be out in some sunshine. It's now overcast, but it was good to be out. I saw a handful of cars. I saw several hundred rabbits, 5 deer and a dead badger, and my legs were tired, but it was good to go out. And I hope you're getting some exercise and looking after your body as part of just being yourself and looking after yourself as much as you can. I'm also in solidarity today with all my with all my brothers and sisters and friends in the church and outside of it in South Africa, who are also in lockdown, in a more stringent kind of lockdown than we are, and doing all kinds of creative things there. So this morning I want to talk a little bit about signposts, and I think something that's coming down the road for all of us. The advice of the Chief Medical Officer in the last few days has been that we should expect this lockdown to continue for potentially 3 months, and that it might be 6 months before we return to no restrictions on our movement, on our being ourselves in the way that we were so used to and had just come to assume. And I don't know how each of you responded to that. I felt quite low yesterday, and and I don't know if it was part of that news, but just the reality of the lack of contact and face to face, and the implications of that, and a good routine in our home, but a very diminished kind of life for all of us that we're having to manage carefully. When my older 2 children, Hannah and Matthew, were small, I told them quite a lot of lies. in a fun way. I used to make things up, and they believed me, of course. And one of those was about street signs. I convinced them for quite a long time that the speed sign for a speed bump, or the road sign for a speed bump, was actually a pregnant snake crossing, and that whenever we approached one, we had to look out for a pregnant snake and make sure that it crossed the road safely. And they took that quite seriously for a couple of years when they were little. And we'd approach one and they'd, Dad, let's look out for the pregnant snake. When I was a late teenager, I had my first car. I had a bumper sticker on my car, which was the old construction sign, with the man with his spade in the pile of stuff in the corner. But the sign said, "Danger, man with heavy umbrella," which I thought was hilarious at the time, and it is still. Whenever I see it, it makes me chuckle. While I was out this morning on my bike, I was listening to Radio 4, which I suppose I shouldn't really do, but there wasn't much traffic, and I can still hear the traffic. I'd have the kind of headphones that make that possible. And I was really struck by a conversation with Alan Titchmarsh and others in the gardening industry about the crisis facing garden centres, who literally have £1 billion worth of plants ready to go, ready to be sold for this May to July planting and gardening season, which is so rich and so intensive in our country's life, and that quite literally all of those plants are likely to just be thrown away. And I couldn't help wonder at the reason why garden centres can't sell plants for an activity that is hugely beneficial in terms of people's mental health and physical well-being and all kinds of things like that there can't be a managed way of doing that. I went to a pet shop yesterday to buy sawdust and hay for our guinea pigs, and there was a one-way system in and a one-way system out, and 2 customers in this huge shop, but you could go and you could buy that, and the irony for me is, and the tragedy I suppose in some ways, is not that garden centres are shut, but that a couple of days ago, the government decided that off-licences that sell alcohol can remain open, that they deem to be an essential service. And I scratch my head about that and think, you can't garden, but somehow in the government's reasoning, access to alcohol is an essential part of people managing themselves, or the government managing the sense of well-being of the nation. Need some thinking about that, and I just don't understand it. And I think I'm not saying for a moment that everyone who drinks alcohol is an addiction or a problem, or that alcohol itself is a problem. But I'm struck by the contrast between those things. Because what alcohol does, like what gardening does, like what for me going out on my bike this morning does, is it kind of moderates us. It gives us an outlet, a thing to do or to take part in or to savor or enjoy in company with others or alone. That's good for us. That settles us somehow. That calms us, or that gives us joy. Gives us joy. And the signpost this morning is simply that I think for all of us, I don't think anyone is excluded from this. For all of us, somewhere down the road, we're going to potentially come unstuck. Because the things that we do that are best for us are not necessarily available to us. And also that the things that we do that avoid the reality of our lives, and this is where alcohol does play a part, the same way that gardening or any other hobby can be an avoidance of dealing with other things or facing other truths in our life, or just being in our skins as we really are, that for all of us, we can expect, if we're going to be in lockdown for some time, we can expect to have some kind of crisis. And I want to use the word crisis because I think it is the right word to use. We're not just going to wobble. We might. But I think for most of us, we're going to get stuck at some point. And maybe part of preparing ourselves in this time of lockdown, maybe part of preparing ourselves to go through it well is to know that that's going to happen. I used to say to students in induction talks at the university that if you go through your university career without getting properly stuck at some point, you've been incredibly lucky, or you've not been paying attention, or you've been in a kind of alcohol and drug fueled haze for most of the time, which your results will show. And I had quite a few pastoral conversations in the years after each of the times I'd said that with students who said, at the time I thought you were just talking nonsense, but I remember that you said that and I'm stuck. I think we should expect to get stuck. And I want to signpost that this morning. I want to say to you, I want to say to myself, the things that are good for us may not be there for us. Equally, the things that are our escape from the reality of the moment and the work we have to do in ourselves, in our relationships, in our self-image, in our memory of our life in the past, and the way we can just push that aside through busyness or substituting the time in which those memories would surface with other activity. Those things are not available to us in anything like the way they have been in the past. It's wonderful to see people on Facebook and other places crafting and singing and doing all kinds of fun things, creative things, things that may not have been available in a busier and less restrictive time. And I celebrate that. We should all celebrate that. The opportunity to be creative is a hugely important part of this season and all that it makes available to us. But a bit like, when I've been on retreat and I've talked about going on retreat, gone to be with a monastic community for a few days in silence, or I've gone by myself to the mountains, as I've talked about in other places, with a tent and my own thoughts. For some people, the idea seems terrifying because they're not sure how they would manage that. And often that fear is about not being sufficiently religious, or not doing it properly. But there's also a kind of romantic and naive view about what that might be like, that it would be wonderful and spiritual and prayerful and deeply connected with God and yourself all the time. What actually happens is what's happening to all of us, and will happen maybe in a less dramatic way, but incrementally may grow. You just lose the ability to avoid the chattering monkeys that are inside of you. You become aware of and have to appreciate, not positively necessarily, but you have to own and accept the fact of the noise and the dysfunction and the unfinished nature of yourself, and that your prayer is anything but attentive, and it's humbling in a good way. I want to signpost for all of us, and I hope this isn't a fearful thing for you, me saying this. I want to signpost for all of us that the days are coming when each of us, if it hasn't started happening already, will feel quite stuck without the things that give us life, or without the things that help us to avoid the things that seem to take away our sense of being alive. And I want to just this morning put that on the table and say to each of you that it would be good to do some thinking about who you will phone first, or who you will start phoning regularly now, or ask to keep in touch with you, so that some of that might be averted, and that crisis might be something that is creative when it comes, in which you learn about yourself and you find yourself more deeply and richly, rather than something that leaves you feeling isolated, alone, frightened, bewildered perhaps, and stuck in a way that is destructive, not just unhelpful. I'm an optimist, I'm a cheerful person, but sometimes calling a spade is important, and I think this morning, struck so deeply by a government who close garden centres and keep open places that sell alcohol, just highlighted that for me. And so I wish you well in all the things that give you life and that are nurturing for you and creative and fun for you in this time. And I wish you well in all the ways that you might find yourself beginning to get stuck. And I want to say again that any of you who's listening to this, who whether you are part of one of my church's life or the community's life, I know people are watching this far and near, and thank you for that. If any of you want to be in touch with me and want to talk about this, or want some advice about how to best care for yourself in this time, and care for someone that you love, that you see getting stuck, then don't hesitate to do so. And my contact details are again at the end of this video, and on Haxby and Wigginton Church's website, Methodist Church's website, and available to you. So be in touch. Have a wonderful Tuesday, whatever it's going to be, or a very ordinary Tuesday, if it's going to be like that. But whatever it is, may it be a good day. God bless. See you tomorrow.